my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and it's Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. Flying solo on today's show, I think on Monday or Tuesday's show, I should say. I was a hot mess who was dying, so today I feel a lot better. I still feel a little nasally, but I'm back to my normal self as far as like energy goes and my ability to talk. So gonna fly solo on today's show. Gonna get into a few different things that I found that have been trending as of late. We're gonna talk about a new warning about a public health crisis here in the United States, and it is guns. Dark, sad stuff, but things we need to hear. We'll also talk a bit about, I guess I'll get to this after. We'll also talk about Puerto Rico again, because I had just been mentioning this in the last episode, like, where are the lawyers, suing people in the Department of Justice and all these things? Well, it was announced this week that Puerto Rico is actually going to be suing former officials who are accused of corruption. So we will talk a bit about that. I think that's an amazing precedent to be set. Also, kind of random, but I think it's an interesting conversation. The show The Bear on Hulu, which had become a recent obsession of mine, a really interesting conversation about the idea of work-life balance and the difficulty in finding it, particularly when you are doing work that you love doing, right? When you are passionate about the things that you do. And I want to touch on that because it's so much, I think, of what I struggle with, and I think of what a lot of people aren't maybe keen to when they think about, do what you love for a living. There is, as with anything else, there are two sides to a coin. So I want to make sure we talk about that. And then on the positive side of things, a legend from the Latin world is going to be getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So we will touch on that. But first, as we always do, let's just dive into the nonsense, the BS, in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the
All right, so let's start with guns. Never a fun thing to talk about, but sadly, it's something we discuss a lot. And there's no getting away from it. I think I talked about this on last week's Thursday Trends, talking about a lawsuit that was happening. There was also another shooting, I believe, at a grocery store in Michigan that happened, amongst other ones. It's like we're so like numb and like normalizing the idea of these mass shootings that's barely even like a headline, news story anymore, or something we even talk about, which is incredibly sad. But it came out this last week on Tuesday. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, issuing a stark warning that firearm violence is a public health crisis that the country must address immediately. Now, they're saying this is the first time that America's leading public health body has focused on gun violence and the effects that the surge in deaths has taken on the nation's physical and mental health. Now, ironically, well, before I even touch on that, this is from MSNBC.com, by the way. Let's touch on this for a second. The effects of gun violence, the obvious ones where there are all of these shootings that happen, so many lives lost at the hands of gun violence. If I'm not mistaken, it is the leading killer of children in this country. But also the mental health aspect of it, right? The idea, and I don't know about y'all, but like, every time I read one of these things or hear about it, or sometimes I'm just out in public and I'm like, man, what if something were to happen here, right? Even as like a DJ, I think about this, I DJ at an LGBTQ club, oftentimes, and they've been targets, not that club in particular, but we've seen it in Orlando. The anniversary happened recently where they were the target of a mass shooting. And I'm be lying to you if I said I didn't sort of like eyeball where my escape route would be, right? These are things that are on my mind. Or I DJ'd the Pride Festival in Jersey City, New Jersey, and there were anti-LGBTQ protesters, and I was on stage, and I'd be lying to you if I said there wasn't a part of me that wasn't a bit nervous of like, what if one of these people have a gun that is out here protesting, right? Or when I hear about a supermarket shooting in a place like Michigan, I think about my parents. What if God forbid, my parents are out food shopping and something like this were to happen? And on the flip side of it, I don't think it's healthy that we're becoming numb to it either, right? That it's sort of becoming a normal part of our society, that we can come across a story on like social media of a mass shooting happening, and we're like, oh man, that's sad, and then just kind of move on with the rest of our day. I don't think that that's probably healthy for us either, right? I think it says a lot about what we're sort of compartmentalizing as human beings, And it's just sad because this is really the product of like big, powerful gun manufacturers and the NRA. And then they flip it as guns sort of being the American way, and it's a form of patriotism and freedom and rights and all these things, right? And they galvanize people behind the idea of like, oh, they're trying to make it harder for you to have a gun. Therefore, they're trying to take away your freedoms as an American. It's anti-American for them to make it harder for you to have a gun. And that becomes, an attack on people's identity, right? Those who are like, we're Americans and we love America. Freedom, freedom, freedom. The American propaganda machine happens. And really, these are people who are just being pawns of the big gun corporations, and the politicians who are pawns themselves, who are collecting kickbacks to their campaigns and whatever else is going on, right? And while they're allowing their greed and their idolization of money to lead the way, people's lives are literally at stake. And it's sad. And another perfect example of this, literally, ironically, as this issue is sort of being spoken about as a public health crisis, you actually had Republicans on the House Appropriations Committee releasing text from a proposed bill that, among other things, they're looking to cut the funding allocated to the Justice Department, right? And this would include the Justice Department's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and severely restrict how the money it does receive can be used. It would basically, and by the way, this is the ATF, and they're the ones who are cracking down on things like guns, and trying to really keep guns off the streets and all these different things. And what they're saying is that this would ban the ATF from using its appropriations to, quote, implement, administer, apply, enforce, or carry out any ATF regulation that has been issued or finalized since President Joe Biden's first full day in office. And that would include the rule that Biden announced in April that would finally close the so-called gun show loophole that allows the private purchase of firearms without a background check. Now think about this, right? Now, I'm not saying this is going to get passed because it still would have to go through the Senate and all that, but these people are proposing a bill, and this is all, performance art for their base, but these are people proposing a bill that would take away logical protection. Why would you not want a background check for someone buying a firearm? Why would we want just any Joe Schmo to be able to walk into a gun show and just buy a gun with nobody asking any questions? It's logic, right? These are logical things, or the idea of like unregistered firearms that are assembled from kits at home, that like the bill would stop them from being able to implement these things. Like it's just, it's crazy. Like the things that are what they call common sense programs that are meant to bring down gun violence would be defunded. They say $0 would be able to go towards funding any state or local, quote, red flag or extreme risk protection order laws, which allows courts to have law enforcement remove guns from the homes of people who are dangerous to themselves or others. Why would you be opposed to the idea that people who are a danger to themselves or others have their guns taken away? Other than the fact that this is a money thing at the end of the day for you, which it is. That's what they're telling us, right? They're painting the picture. This is patriotism. This is our freedom as Americans, our rights. But it's not. And their whole thing is, well, guns don't kill people. Irresponsible gun owners kill people. If that's your argument, why then are you constantly opposed to making it harder for irresponsible people to gain access to weapons? It's bullshit. That's really what it is at the end of the day. Again, this is all performance art at the end of the day. This is saying one thing, but in reality, your actions making it very clear you really just bow down to the almighty dollar. You value that over human lives at the end of the day. And it's incredibly sad. And a large part of this population is being played like a fool. And it's the American propaganda machine. By the way, I think I was reading something. First time in 20 years, America doesn't rank in top 20 of quality of life. It actually might be not 20 years. It might be just doesn't rank in top 20. In a newly released 2024 World Happiness Report, the U.S. dropped out of the top 20 on the list for the first time in the report's 12-year history. The U.S. now ranks number 23 as happiest place to live, basically, happiest countries in the world. And yeah, that might sound like a stupid little, statistic, but it speaks to, because there are other statistics where we're not number one in healthcare, we're not number one in quality of life, of, whatever. There are education. It speaks to the idea that we're being sold the propaganda of American greatness without actually doing anything to achieve said greatness. It's all smoke and mirrors that the politicians are selling us on to keep themselves in power and to keep collecting checks, to keep their fan bases riled up and excited about being American. And that way they can pull the strings and things like this where, it's un-American to make it harder for Americans to get guns, right? They want to take away your American rights, patriotism. And while doing so, they're not ever trying to actually address any issues, right? Even if you look around you and you're like, man, things are not great here or could be a lot better, they're lying to you and saying how bad it is everywhere else, basically. That's the greatest illusion that people pull, is it's like as if the rest of the world is fucking on fire right now and America is the only civilized place in the world. And that's just not true. But again, it's America, the American propaganda machine, and American elitism that allows us to be blind and played like puppets by those in power. And it allows them to pull the old smoke and mirrors, and the wool over our eyes around the issues that actually matter. And this being one of them right here. It's just sad and frustrating stuff, man. So we'll take a quick break. I got a couple more things I want to get into. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. All right, we are back. And I want to touch on this story because I talked a bit about this. I mean, I talk about it a lot, but on my social media, I talked about it, I think, in last week's episode as well. Puerto Rico, and, where are the powers that be in holding the corruption or I mean, just corruption in order or accountable, I guess I should say, right? Like there are, systems in place where people could be held accountable. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see this story pop up from AP News, and I'll put the link in the show notes for the full article. But it's Puerto Rico sues former officials accused of corruption to recover more than $30 million in public funds. Now, $30 million is not a ton of money in the grand scheme of what the island needs, but this is a start, right? Like they say, Puerto Rico's Justice Department announced Tuesday it is suing at least 30 former government officials accused of corruption to recover more than $30 million in public funds. Among those sued are 3 former legislators, including Maria Milagros Charbonnier, who was sentenced in May to 8 years in federal prison after being found guilty of theft, bribery, and a kickback scheme. Quote, "We are going to recover the Puerto Rican people's money and claim an amount that totals 3 times the damage caused by those who have illegally appropriated public funds," said Domingo Emanueli, the U.S. Territory's Justice Secretary. So Puerto Rico's Justice Secretary. Also sued are 8 former mayors, and one was I'll read their names. Let's publicly shame them. Also sued are 8 former mayors, including Felix Delgado of Cataño and Angel Perez of Guaynabo. Delgado was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison in March after pleading guilty to accepting bribes in exchange for awarding millions of dollars worth of municipal contracts. Perez was sentenced to more than 5 years in federal prison in February after being found guilty of bribery and extortion. Quote, "For the first time on the island, the Puerto Rican Justice Department sued more than 30 convicts for corruption with the purpose of recovering public funds and demanding reparation for the damages they caused to the Puerto Rican people." This was said by Emanueli, right? This is beautiful. And I hope that this is just a start, right? Like, let's start fucking turning over these stones and let's start going after these people. Start investigating the people of Luma, the power company, right? Investigate every single one of these people and start creating a precedent that says, if you are going to steal from the people, if you are going to be corrupt, we are going to hold you accountable. This no longer will be tolerated. And shit like this gets me really excited, right? Because this is the people of Puerto Rico, right? Because this is their Justice Department taking it upon themselves to hold former politicians and former leaders accountable for what they've done, right? And this is the type of self-serving that we need if we want to move towards independence, right? I believe in Puerto Rican independence, but I also don't believe in the sort of shiny, dream that's also being sold to us by a lot of people who are pro-independent. I believe that Puerto Rico has more than enough resources and just capability in general to be a high-functioning, independent country. With that said, we have to get our house in order before that, right? There's a lot of conversation happening right now around Puerto Rican independence. I believe there was I know there was a hearing at the UN in New York. I went to a rally afterwards, and the UN basically gave its professional recommendation that the US allow the people to decide their status, right? Now, that's not binding or anything. That's just a suggestion from a powerful body, the UN, right? But what fell short for me in a lot of the conversations that are happening around Puerto Rican independence, right? I hear the independence movement. I love it. I'm energized by it. But there's a lot of conversation around what the U.S. is doing wrong, which I agree with, but not enough conversation around what do we need to do to get our house in order so that we can be self-sustaining, right? So that we can be in a prospering, independent nation, because I believe we can be. But we also have to hold ourselves accountable. Yes, a lot of shit is because of the U.S. and all that happens from being a colonized territory, right? The difficulties that happen, the lack of representation, things like the Jones Act and making it more difficult and expensive to get goods on the island, right? All of those different things are very real and very true. But also, We have to hold ourselves accountable. Start voting the right people in office. Start going after those who are obviously participating in major corruption, right? We have to get our house in order before we can become an independent nation. Again, I believe we can get there, but let's also hold ourselves accountable. I hear a lot of conversation around the idea that Puerto Ricans are being pushed out with gentrification and rising, cost of housing from outsiders coming in looking for tax breaks. And I agree, it's a problem that needs to be solved. But who caused that issue? You are putting all your anger and energy towards the gringos that are moving onto the island for a tax break, when in reality, it was your local government that made this an option in the first place. That was under Ricky Rosselló that happened, right? He's somebody who was voted in by the people. So you have to elect the right people. And Ricky Rosselló, by the way, was ousted as governor, but then won an election soon after that for a lower level position. He's still involved in the government. So you have to hold yourselves accountable, get your house in order. Then you can start attacking those who are also holding you back. But it starts first with us as Puerto Ricans to hold ourselves accountable and get ourselves on the right track so we can then address the bigger issues. But that's what's so frustrating to me. They're attacking, I hate these people coming in, all this. I get it. But that was a law, a system created by your local government. People you elected implemented things like Act 60. They implemented the idea of tax breaks for the wealthy outsiders. So you getting mad at the wealthy outsiders for taking advantage of that doesn't really help the cause. Get mad at your local government who thought that the solution was bringing outsiders in, right? Vote people in office who are going to repeal that, who are going to create tax breaks or create benefits for those on the island. That's where you should be focusing your energy. And I think a lot of times we are short-sighted and we go after the easy target. It's easy to go after the Jake Pauls of the world and Logan Pauls of the world because they're this glaring example of everything that's wrong with Puerto Rico's current status and current situation. I get that. But they're just a bunch of random people who are rich and trying to take advantage of tax breaks. That happens all over the world. Yeah, it's annoying. Yeah, we don't want them there. But they're not the root of your issue. The root of your issue is your local government and the people that you are electing. Hold yourselves accountable and hold them accountable. Show up and vote. Vote for the right people. And when they do have on the docket that you get to vote on, the status of the island, everybody needs to show up. Because what's happening now is barely anybody shows up to vote for that. The only ones who do vote for it are the statehooders. And then the outside world looks at that and says, well, you know what? The majority of Puerto Ricans voted for statehood or voted for status quo. So because you're not showing up to vote and have your voice heard, the rest of the world is confused as to what you actually want and then holds that against you. So we need to start showing up as Puerto Ricans and holding ourselves accountable and clean our house up, get our house in order before we then attack the bigger issue of American colonialism. That's my take. Whew. I feel like I just took over like the voice of my father right there. That was a little bit scary. I just became my dad for a second. That's my take on that. Now, let's talk a bit about something a little lighter, I think. I'm literally like out of breath. I just had a stream of consciousness there. That's my maybe future Governor Dramos speaking there. One of these days, maybe. I'll just flip the script and become a politician and just go in. Anyway, let's talk about The Bear, a TV show on Hulu, right? And again, when I talk about these pop culture things, you don't actually have to know what the hell I'm talking about. I'm just referencing it as a starting point, right? But The Bear is a show about a chef who moves back home, takes over his family's restaurant after his brother passes away, and wants to basically flip the restaurant from a sort of just local towny divey restaurant into like this high-end restaurant, that is like of legend in Chicago, basically, right? And I saw this really interesting article on MSNBC, and they talk about how the show is beyond just a show about a family, beyond just a show about a chef. It's as they say, a series that distills how work-life balance is rarely an option for people consumed with passion for their craft. And I thought this was really interesting point of view that's not spoken about enough, right? They say it's an ode to the psychic struggles of people thoroughly, hopelessly, and self-destructively committed to their professions. And they go on to quote Ao Edebiri, who plays Sydney on the show, and she once commented on the downside of actors' devotion to their vocation, saying, quote, "If you're so consumed with making things, there's no reserve in the well. There's no real life in you." And the article goes on to say that the bear is short on solutions to the paradox of loving the labor that destroys you. Mercifully, it does not suggest that you achieve work-life balance. For artisans, at least, that's a dumb idea, a non-starter, and impossible to achieve anyhow. Rather, the series reminds us that within the paradox, within the chaos, there exists a sort of evenness, a predictable up and down. I'm going to break all that down for a second here. I think a lot of people, and you know this if you're already somebody who's an artist and you're trying to make something happen or you are successful in it, right? And this is something I struggle with constantly. I think even if you're somebody who's like, man, one day I want to make a living off of the things that I love, right? My passions, the things that I really enjoy in this life. And we glamorize it, I think, as we should, right? I think it is an incredibly fulfilling life. But on the flip side of it, as I always say, a yes to one thing is a no to something else. And as an artist, as a creative, as somebody passionate about their craft, your hobby, if you're lucky, becomes your profession, right? The thing that you used to do to alleviate stress in your free time, whatever it might be, this now becomes the thing that is all consuming because you're getting paid for it and you have to show up to do it, right? And I think what I've recognized for me and what I've been struggling with over the last few years and what I think I'm getting better at, but like what always seems to be impossible, is just how there's no clear line anymore between my personal life and what I do for a living, basically, right? Because what I do for a living is what I would have done in my free time in my personal life, right? And instinctually or instinctively, what happens to me is, like on the weekends, I'm getting better at this, but on the weekends, if I'm like off, like from like DJing or whatever, I'm like, oh man, awesome. I get to like go work on this other creative project that I've been putting off. Not, oh, awesome, I'm going to go rest. I'm going to go hang out with friends. I'm going to go, whatever, sleep all day. No, my instinct is always like, great, this gives me an extra day to work, basically, right? And the problem is, and a part of me almost feels bad saying this, and maybe I don't have kids. I'm not married. So, take this for what it's worth. But truth is, there's not much on this earth that I enjoy doing more than like the creative things I like doing. I hate, like, and that's the fucked up paradox of this, right? I hate to say it, but even when I was in a relationship, going on a dinner date was great. Awesome. Loved it. I would have much rather been home on my computer designing a t-shirt or doing something else. And that's not a dig at the person I was with or what we were doing. But really, it's like nothing fires me up more than the creative projects that I work on. I'm obsessed. And that's why I get to do it for a living is because I've been obsessed with this since I was 16, 17 years old. I mean, prior to that, but really, like saying, hey, I'm going to make a career out of music to start was 16, 17 years old. I have prioritized it over everything else in my life from then till basically now. And that obsession has yielded me the ability to make a living doing things that I enjoy doing, but also, on the flip side of it, a life that is oftentimes incredibly out of balance. And sort of to what they even talk about, amidst the chaos, there's like joy, right? I love the chaos a little bit, the ups and downs. Like, and not to say I don't experience the heartbreak or get angry or get frustrated, but in the moments where everything is going smoothly, I get kind of bored. It's not as exciting to me. And I struggle with this when it comes to motivation, all these different things where it's like I'm constantly like having to like I'm at a point where I'm struggling to find the balance of like, my motivation coming from being light and fluffy almost, right? Oh, I'm just getting lost in my creativity. I love it. And whatever happens, happens. But the other part of me is like, how do we fire ourselves up right now, right? How do we create this internal dialogue of a battle that we have to win? Because that's what's fucking exciting to me. Right? What's exciting to me is getting my heart broken, getting shit on career-wise by somebody, and then waking up the next day fucking fired up and like, oh, I'm going to prove you motherfuckers wrong, right? Or somebody bailing on me. Like I remember in the pandemic when everything was sort of falling apart, and it was like I had, a few people around me that were helping me out with stuff, and then it was just kind of like, boom, everybody was moving on and doing their own thing. And then it was my motivation was like, oh, I'll show you guys. All of a sudden, I fucking pick up graphic design. I start going hard on Photoshop. I go hard on video editing. I taught myself all this shit, right? It was like this fire got fucking lit up inside of me, and I became a creative in an aspect that I never even knew I had, basically. Right? And I struggle with the idea of like, how do I be a normal person who enjoys normal shit and isn't working from the time he wakes up to the time he goes to bed, but still being fired up to fucking just, like have that fuel inside of me, right? And I think that's what it speaks about. And I'm just like, I just blacked out for like 10 minutes of whatever the hell I was just saying. But back to the bear, it's the idea that I think work-life balance isn't a real thing, I guess, right? That's what they're saying. And I struggle with this. That's not necessarily my opinion per se, but I get what they are talking about. I think what really strikes me right now is I was listening to an interview with the person who produced, I can't remember what song it was for J. Cole, right? And he was a producer. And he was talking about like his big breakthrough beat. I don't know if it was Work Out or like the song Work Out for Me from J. Cole or one of like J. Cole's big singles that he had, right? And the dude was talking about like, I don't know if he was in the back of an Uber on the way to dinner with his girl or if they were at dinner. I think he was in the back of an Uber, and in the car, the Uber driver was playing a song. And I guess it was like some old song, and all of a sudden it hit the producer, like an idea just hit him. And he basically had to tell his girl, like, listen, I have this idea. I need to get it out of my head and basically like bring it into the world. I'm sorry. I'm going to make it up to you, but I have to go to the studio instead of going to dinner right now. And he did that. And ended up producing the biggest record of his entire career. It basically like kickstarted his career into what it is now. And I think that is like a great example of sort of what it takes to be successful as a creative, but also the type of people you need to have around you, right? I think more than trying to be like work-life balance, I'm going to work from 8 to 6 and then from 6 p.m. is family time. I think the hard part about that is, and I try to do that, but the hard part about that is when you're creative, inspiration strikes you at any time, and creativity or that spark is fleeting at the end of the day. So you have to kind of ride the wave as it comes, right? And if you miss the wave, you potentially just missed out on your next great idea, right? Like hypothetically, if that producer didn't go to the studio, he may have never produced that beat, or at least not produced it to the way that it was, because he wouldn't have been as inspired, and he might have missed out on the biggest opportunity of his entire career. And that's the shit that sticks with me, and I think a lot of creatives is when I get that spark, that idea, for my soul, I have to like vomit it out of my system in order to feel like a normal person. Because if not, I'm fucking anxious and it's all that I can think about. And on the flip side of it, it's like, what if this is the idea I've been waiting on, right? I've been obsessed with the idea of like clarity to get the download from God, essentially, right? The universe, whatever you want to replace that with. But in the moments where I don't know what's next, I'm like, all right, just keep creating clarity in your mind. Keep creating clarity in your mind. Eventually, you will receive the download from the universe or from God. And when you receive it, you got to fucking go 100 miles an hour at it, right? Because that's your moment. And that's why I think work-life balance in a traditional sense is really difficult. And when I was sort of getting at with like that producer and his girl, he's lucky that he has a partner who understands that and I'm sure she wasn't the happiest about it, but was like, you know what? I get it. Go do your thing. I know you're going to make it up to me. And I'm sure he did when them checks started rolling in. But I think it's like, instead of trying to eliminate the chaos from your life, as a creative, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who wants something outside of the norm, the chaos is a way of life. And you have to embrace it. And in fact, if you're honest with yourself, a part of you probably thrives off of it a bit, right? Controlled chaos. Not complete chaos, but controlled chaos. And as it's sort of saying, it's like, it's within the chaos there exists a sort of evenness, a predictable up and down, right? So it's almost saying the up and down, accepting it as a part of life, as a way of life, rather than trying to like, control it too much and to sort of make it a 9 to 5, because it's not a 9 to 5. 9 to 5, you could show up to the office and just fucking like blank stare your way to the end of the day, right? Everything's on the back burner and you just basically fucking do whatever you have to do to get it done. When it comes to a creative project, that requires a flow state. That requires you getting lost in it. That requires you just tapping into something otherworldly. It's a download that you're receiving from something that is not of this world. And for us who dream of something outside of the norm, creativity, entrepreneur-wise, whatever it might be, that idea of work-life balance may not be a real thing. Now, can you find balance within the chaos? Absolutely, but it has to be like a flexible sort of balance, I think. And I don't know. I just wanted to like share that. I just found this article, A, interesting for me selfishly, but B, I think it would probably resonate for a lot of people who are maybe trying to build something or have built something, and you're just trying to make sense of it all and like organize it, right? And I think I want to let you know that it's okay to sort of feel like it's never going to be organized or it's always going to be slightly chaotic. I just think that's the norm of being a creative, of doing something outside of the norm, of not just having your standard 9 to 5 job. It's always going to be a bit of chaos. And until you're probably ridiculously successful to the point where if you wanted to, you could just stop working completely. Until you're at that point, it's probably going to be incredibly difficult to have a very rigid structure to your day and your life. It's going to have to sort of be go with the flow, be like water type of thing, right? And everybody around you is going to have to kind of understand that's part of your process, your lifestyle, what gets you going and what makes you you. And I just think that that's an interesting conversation that maybe is not spoken about enough when we talk about the idea of chasing your dreams. So I wanted to share that. Now, with that said, let's get into some positivity in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so I want to quickly just touch on somebody from our community, a legend that is finally being honored. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us, but the legend that is Jenny Rivera will actually be getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I was just reading this. I didn't realize how young she was. So she's a Mexican-American singer. Some people know her as La Diva de la Banda. And she died in 2012 at the age of 43. She was so young on a plane crash. And she is somebody who's known for sort of changing the game as far as like regional Mexican music goes, the genre, being a woman in it, and really being an inspiration, I think, for a lot of people in the community. And she's now going to be getting her Walk of Fame star in Hollywood, which is absolutely amazing. So it's happening on June 27th in front of Capitol Records on Vine Street. And Children Chiquis, who actually has a show here on the My Cultura podcast network. And their other kids, Jackie, Michael, Johnny, and Jenica, will accept the star on their mother's behalf. I don't know, man. I think I'm always the person who's like, I don't need, this doesn't even need this explanation, but like, I'm always the person who's like, who cares about these accolades and things like that? But again, in our community, our culture, traditionally, we haven't been the ones being presented with these sort of accolades, right? These mainstream accolades. So I think whenever it happens, you have to stop and pause for a second and recognize how important that moment is, right? That representation that's happening, you know? I think to myself, what happens when a young Mexican girl or Latina in general or somebody of color walks by that star and sees the last name Rivera on there, right? To me, that's an inspiration of somebody who shares in a similar lineage to me, was able to make it to this point. Why can't that also be me? And for me, in my times of doubt and just struggles, often that's sort of been what I've needed to keep on going, to keep on pushing, is to be able to just look to somebody and see their journey, relate to them in some sort of way, and recognize that if it could happen for them, it could definitely happen for me. So I think that's why moments like this are so incredibly important and beautiful to see, and people like her need to be celebrated. And it's just a beautiful thing, and that's why I want to kind of just stop for a moment and honor her legacy and the inspiration that she continues to be, more than 10 years after her passing. So just amazing stuff. So big congrats to the legend that is Jenny Rivera and her entire family, who are going to be able to honor their mother. And I didn't even realize June 27th is today. So really just beautiful to see. Now, with that said, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, I'll keep it short and sweet. Guns being recognized as a public health issue in this country. No shocker there. Mental and physical health related, right? And as that's happening, ironically, but also just like another day in America, another perfect, like almost dark humorous day in America. On the other side of that, Republicans basically trying to make it easier for people to get guns and to not have background checks and to not fund the proper agencies who are trying to keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. And it just sort of speaks again to how fucked up the ideology is in this country and why it's so important for us to vote come November. The debate is happening tonight between Trump and Biden, the first one. I mean, just these are real, things that are on the line here, our safety, our quality of life here in this country. And I know somebody like Biden has been perfect, but his party also isn't trying to put weapons in the hands of people who potentially could take the life of somebody that you know. Just saying. Now, Puerto Rico suing former officials. A beautiful maybe starting point is what I'm hoping for us to get our house in order so that we can progress the beautiful island of Puerto Rico into hopefully becoming the independent country that deserves to be, and providing an amazing quality of life for everybody that lives there. But these are the starting places that we need to happen, where we hold people accountable, where we create a precedent and say this will no longer be tolerated. Corruption will no longer be tolerated. You will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Jail time, all the money that you possibly have, we will go after it if you decide to take advantage of the people. And this needs to be the standard that happens, and I hope we see more and more lawsuits like this one, protecting the people and holding those accountable who think they are above, doing right by those who put them in office. The show The Bear, which is on Hulu now, highly recommend. Season 3, I haven't started watching it yet. That might be my weekend thing. But I just think interesting conversation about work-life balance, the difficulty of it, the elusiveness of it, especially if you are somebody who's trying to do something outside the norm. I think also maybe hopefully recognizing how difficult that is and maybe impossible it is, and how there's not something wrong with you that you are so passionate about wanting to do something and you sacrifice a lot to do it. This is the struggle of being a creative, and you're not alone in it, and you just have to do your best to mold life in a way that makes sense and maybe gives you the best opportunity to express your creative needs, right? Because it really is a need for us. This isn't just look at me type of stuff. If you're a real creative, you have to, it's like something inside of you. It's like you have to just get it out of your system, get it out of your mind, right? And if you don't, you're not yourself, right? You're like a shell of yourself. So hopefully that conversation maybe puts some people at ease around not beating yourself up so much if you're devoting a lot of time to a particular project, or maybe opening yourself up to having conversations with those around you about how you can create a lifestyle that makes them happy and feel like they're engaged and you're being a part of your relationship, your family, whatever it might be, but also still serving your inherent need to create and to do the things that you're passionate about. And then also lastly, big shout to the legend that is Jenny Rivera, getting her Hollywood the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Obviously much deserved, just a legend in our community and an inspiration to let people know, no matter where you came from, no matter what your last name is, your background, you too can achieve great things and make your dreams come true. So congrats to her and her family for this moment of celebrating her life and her career. And it just, is a testament to the inspiration that we all can be via the work that we leave behind, even after we're gone. I think that's a beautiful thing. Now, with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. No shows next week. I'm taking off next week for July 4th. So no podcast, but we will be returning the second week of July, which will be the 10th. So, man, the 10th, no, the 8th, sorry. I'm looking at June's calendar. But yeah, I'm going to take off next week for July 4th and just allow myself to relax a little bit and just catch up on some stuff and maybe enjoy some barbecuing in my backyard. That's the goal. So we'll be back on July 8th. Everybody have an amazing weekend. Have an amazing July 4th holiday. I know all the conversations in our country makes it kind of tough to be super patriotic these days for many of us. But still, a beautiful place that has a lot of potential. And hopefully you get to spend some time with your loved ones and, just break up the monotony of everyday life with the holiday. With that said, I will catch you next time. Until then, a week and a half, basically. Be safe, and I will talk to you soon. Peace.